Welcome to True Terror Files. Today we tell you the story of Woolpit, Suffolk, 12th century. During the harvest, two children emerged from the wolf pits with green skin and impossible voices. They were a physical crack in reality. Their strange clothes and lost gazes sowed a deep dread that even today endures through time. Without further ado, we begin. According to contemporary chronicles, William of Newburgh recounted the facts in his work Historia Rerum Anglicarum. It was an ordinary harvest day on the borders of Woolpit. The peasants were working near the deep pits dug to trap wolves. There they found the pair of siblings. What first disturbed the witnesses was not just the color of their skin. It was the texture of their garments. They were not made of wool nor common linen. The fabric emitted a faint and unknown glow. It was a material that seemed to be alive. Those children radiated an absolute and heartbreaking solitude. They seemed like castaways from a world without light. Upon emerging into the open field, the midday sun struck them forcefully. They did not seek warmth in its rays. On the contrary, they cowered in pure fear. Their eyes showed an instinctive dread towards the brightness of the sky. Every flash of sunlight seemed to wound their pupils. For them, our light was a lethal and unknown threat. They found themselves in an environment where even the air proved extremely aggressive and hostile to them. They were helpless strangers in their own physical existence. Sir Richard de Calne took custody of the siblings. In the gloom of his stone hall, the knight offered them the finest delicacies. However, the little one's reaction was one of absolute rejection. The bread, meat, and wine seemed like toxic substances to their senses. Days passed filled with bitter and inconsolable crying that filled every corner of the building. Those cries were not from ordinary children. They were laments from beings who felt poisoned by our air. They were trapped in a slow agony before the eyes of their captors. Death by starvation seemed inevitable until some raw broad beans arrived in the hall. Upon seeing them, the children pounced on them with animal ferocity. But what horrified the witnesses was their method. They were not interested in the nutritious seed. They tore apart the green stalks to suck out the inner pith with desperation. That confirmed Sir Richard's darkest suspicion. Their biology was not a physical defect. It responded to a world with different chemical rules. They were before a life form that rejected the very essence of our existence. Their hunger was as strange as their origin. The chronicler Ralph of Coggeshall documented in his work Chronicon Anglicanum that the adaptation was a mirage. While the girl seemed to grow stronger, her younger brother began to wither like a plant uprooted. For him, our atmosphere was not life, but an invisible poison that consumed his lungs. His gaze became wandering and heavy. Often, the little one followed with his eyes slow movements in the air that no one else could perceive. He seemed to observe entities or presences that dwelled in the hidden folds of our reality. His body showed no wounds or common fevers. He suffered from extreme weakness that the doctors of the time could not understand. The child finally succumbed to a state of absolute and total languor. It was a silent death, devoid of evident physical causes in our known world. His passing left a somber warning for Sir Richard de Calne. The air we breathe, so natural for us, was a deadly trap for those who belonged to another place. Reality itself had become his final and definitive executioner. The girl survived the harsh winter as her diet gradually changed. Upon eating our common bread, the green tint of her skin began to fade. It was a slow and disturbing transformation for those who observed her. Her original color gave way to a strange paleness, as if her essence was being erased by our food. It didn't seem like a healing, but rather the loss of her own nature. When she learned to speak English, the mystery turned into a nightmare for the villagers. She didn't come from another geographical realm, but from a place submerged in eternal twilight. There the sun never managed to rise. She described her home as a land of shadows and dim light. That world lacked colors and lived in absolute stillness. Her words unleashed a profound terror in the village. She mentioned a river that separated her world from a luminous land in the distance. But that light never reached her. The villagers understood that they did not share the same plane of reality. Her presence was a constant reminder that something dark lurked beneath the surface of the known. The girl finally called her home the land of St. Martin. There, the sun never reached its zenith, and all its inhabitants shared the greenish tone of their skin. They lived submerged in a perpetual twilight, a frigid afternoon that never ended. The most unsettling thing for the listeners was her description of an absolute physical frontier. She spoke of a great river, a body of water that separated her gray world from another distant realm. From its bank, they could see a land bathed in a blinding light. It was a glow that promised life, but which was unreachable for them. This detail suggests something much more terrifying than a simple remote region. It describes a parallel existence, a dark mirror of Suffolk that vibrates outside our own timeline. Imagine the psychological horror of observing a forbidden paradise on the other side of the water. They were condemned to gaze at a brightness that would never reach their faces. It was not about distance, but a barrier between realities. The land of St. Martin was right here, hidden behind a different frequency. It was a withered version of our history, a dimension where the light stopped forever. When Sir Richard asked her about her origin, the young woman recounted a transition that defies all physical logic, which makes us wonder how exactly did they arrive in our world. It was not a journey, but a sensory trap. She said they were tending their father's cattle when a metallic sound ripped through the air of their land. They were bells, a deep chime that felt strangely familiar to them, similar to the one we still hear today in Bury St. Edmund's Abbey. Hypnotized by that vibration, the siblings followed the echo to a dark cavern. Upon entering, the blackness was not a void, but a presence that seemed to watch their steps. They walked for hours in a sepulchral silence, completely losing track of the time elapsed. Suddenly, the tunnel spat their bodies out into a scorching heat and a white light that hurt their pupils. It was harvest noon in Suffolk. As they turned to flee, the entrance had vanished forever. No trace remained of the way back to their home, only the echo of bells that had unknowingly led them to a cruel prison of perpetual light. Over time, the young woman accepted the name Agnes and became integrated into the service of the local knight. She was no longer the wild creature found in the pits, but a woman who walked among us. Later records in King's Lynn suggest that she married a local man. However, her adaptation was always a tragic and fragile mask. The chronicles describe her as someone with immodest and erratic behavior. It is probable that these terms concealed her neighbors' fear of her strange conduct. Agnes never ceased to be an emotional foreigner. Often, she would stand motionless in front of the darkest areas of the house. Her gaze would get lost in the shadows with a disturbing fixity. She seemed to await a sign or a whisper that never reached human ears. Although she wore our fabrics and spoke our language, her soul remained anchored in that eternal twilight. She lived as a permanent exile, searching in the dark corners for the trace of a home that the light had stolen. The account of Woolpit persists today as one of the most unsettling chronicles of impossible displacements. It is not a distant legend, but a documented rift in the fabric of our own reality. The wolf pits have disappeared under centuries of earth, but the sense of a porous border remains intact in Suffolk. Modern science, incapable of offering a definitive answer, observes this case with an uncomfortable silence. The most disturbing thing is not the children's origin, but the proximity of their home. The land of St. Martin was not a remote planet, but a layer of existence that vibrates right next to ours. Perhaps that tunnel of darkness was not a unique accident in history. As you walk through the fields of England, a doubt arises that chills the blood. The world we perceive could be just a thin, fragile, and brittle veil. On the other side, in that eternal twilight Agnes described centuries ago, something is still waiting. The borders are still there, invisible and hungry, waiting for someone to once again hear the distant echo of bells forgotten in time. Thank you for joining us on this descent into the unsettling story of the Green Children. If you feel an inexplicable chill as the sun sets, perhaps you have perceived the echo of San Martin's land. Subscribe to continue exploring the darkest corners of our past. Always stay alert in the gloom. The boundaries of our reality are much thinner than you imagine. Yesterday still watches us from the perpetual and icy shadows. Until the next installment, goodbye.